Okay, so here we are in lesson week 2 of Introduction to Philosophy. And this week's topic is moral relativism. Now, you may have heard this term before. It's used a lot in certain discussions about social values and in political discussions often to express the idea that many people believe that morality, that is right and wrong, good and evil, ethics in general, that those things are relative to different cultures. So culture A could have one set of moral values, culture B could have another set, culture C could have still another set. And the idea is that for the moral relativist, that we can't judge between these different societies, that what's right for one culture is wrong for another and vice versa, but there is no true answer as to what the correct morality is. And so that's the main idea behind moral relativism. Now, like a lot of views, this is an ancient view, and we can trace it back to the ancient Greek philosophers, primarily people who would be known as Athenians from that city-state of Athens. Now, there's one group of people known as sophists who, as the text describes, took money to teach people how to present arguments that something is right or something is wrong so that they could, say, defend themselves in court or be successful in politics. And a lot of the sophists believe that there were no right or wrong answers to these ethical or political questions. It's just whoever argued and convinced people was the winner, and so winning was the goal, not truth. This is contrasted with philosophy, the idea that, well, in philosophy we seek the truth, and a lot of the ancient Greek philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, for example, thought there were correct answers as to what the correct moral views are, what the correct moral values are, as opposed to the sophists. Now, interestingly, both these words come from the Greek word sophos, which means wisdom, which shows that they have ties in a similar background. Now, a famous sophist was Protagoras, who said, man is the measure of all things. And the idea there is an expression of relativism, that right and wrong are just a matter of what people have decided they are. Plato, on the other hand, as the text discusses, thought that there were actually forms of justice. So there are standards of right and wrong that are independent of what any individual or culture believes about right and wrong. That there is a correct way to live your life. There is a correct standard of justice. So on the one hand, we have the sophist Protagoras arguing for moral relativism. And on the other side, the philosopher Plato arguing for what we could call moral absolutism, and that is what our text calls it. Now, these labels, as the author of our text says, are not as important as understanding what the label is applying to. But the term moral relativism has been used quite a bit. Moral absolutism, on the other hand, may not be that common a phrase that you would hear on a regular basis. Although it is, in this context, supposed to be the contrast to moral relativism. Moral relativism saying there are no correct standards of right and wrong. It's just dependent on whatever the culture believes. Moral absolutism is the view that, well, no, there are correct standards of right and wrong, independent of any culture's beliefs. Now, the author in his pro and con sections gives arguments or reasons in support of each view. And I'm not going to rehearse these in detail. That's what the text is for you to read it and look at it. And there are other arguments and reasons that can be given in support of these views and also to argue against them. Now, the three things he says in support of moral relativism are that, morality is a set of rules. And so the idea is that, well, we can come up with rules of morality. Where do these rules come from? Well, people made them up. Just like we could make up laws, we could make up rules of various games like basketball. And so since we know that these rules are just things that people made up, we can't say that these are the correct rules, again, for that reason. The second one is that people are taught moral rules. It's another reason he gives. And that you could be taught a different set of rules. And the reason we think things are right or wrong is because we've been taught that. And finally, he says that no one could step outside of all moral systems. And what he means by that is, well, if you have culture A that believes one thing and culture A that believes something else, say that, for example, female circumcision is the correct thing to do in one culture and the other culture believes it's not the correct thing to do, there's no way you could step outside of each of those and form an opinion from some third viewpoint which would be beyond them. Because if it's from another culture, then again, you have the same problem with moral relativism. And the question is there a view from above, as it were, that would allow you to make that kind of judgment? And the moral relativist in this case says, no, there isn't. So those are the arguments or reasons given here for moral relativism. Now, on the other hand, in the next section, the absolutist view says that, well, moral relativism is wrong, and gives various reasons for that. And it does use the example of female circumcision, also known as excision, in this context. And one thing he says, well, it makes no sense because the reasons for these moral differences that the relativist gives are not relevant kinds of reasons. So we need to know, why does someone believe something's right and something's wrong? There must be a reason behind it. And the relativist can't find the right kind of reason to support these things. The next one is that, well, people make moral judgments, and when we make moral judgments, we think that our judgments are correct. And so even if we're a relativist, how are we going to say that, well, that's wrong for you, but it's not wrong for me? If you see something that you think is wrong, you think that it's wrong, period, not just wrong for you or just wrong for your society. You would tend to think, well, it's wrong for everyone. And again, she uses this example from real life to try to illustrate in the text that the author uses. So in a nutshell, and rather quickly, those are the reasons given for moral relativism and moral absolutism. There are other reasons that can be given, as I said, for these views, but those are the main ones that are given here in the text. Now, finally, there's a clip that's we should see this week in our viewing, which is from the film Thank You for Smoking, which is a really neat. It's a comedy. It's rated R, so if you decide to watch it, be forewarned that there is content that is for people who are old enough to not be too offended by such content, I guess, or negatively influenced. But it's a film where you see moral relativism and sophistry at work throughout the film, and it's an interesting satire or comedy, if you will, of these kind of ideas and how they work in the political sphere and the social sphere. Okay, so this week we have, as we did last week, you have your initial discussion response, which is due by Wednesday, and then your at least 4 replies and comments to your classmates, which are due throughout the week, and then your summary reflection, which is due by Sunday of this week. Okay, there we go, and we've talked about moral relativism, arguments for and against, and you will have at it now and see what you think.